I have always believed that reality is far stranger than what we have been trained to perceive. And yet, even with all my explorations, all my experiences, all the moments where consciousness opened like a forbidden doorway, nothing prepared me for the realization that came to me one night. A realization so heavy, so unignorable, that I knew it wasn't just meant for me. It was meant for all of humanity. It felt like a final warning, a last whisper from the universe before the curtain falls. I remember sitting alone, staring at the dark horizon, and suddenly feeling something watching me. Not a creature, not a ghost, but a presence made of pure understanding. It was as if the cosmos itself leaned forward and asked me a question so terrifying, so brutally honest that it shook every belief I had ever held. It asked, "Why are you allowing your mind to shrink inside a world that was built for expansion?" And in that moment, I realized that the greatest prisons we ever enter are the ones we build inside our own consciousness. Not with bars, not with walls, but with ideas someone else planted, long before we learn to think for ourselves. You see, we have been conditioned to live inside abstractions. We worship symbols, not reality. We chase illusions, not truth. We obey systems that were never designed with human freedom in mind. And while all of this unfolds, an entire universe of possibility waits just outside the boundaries of our beliefs. The tragedy is that most people will never even reach those boundaries because they never question the map they were handed at birth. When I first understood this, I felt something break open inside me. It wasn't enlightenment, it was confrontation. I had to wrestle with the simple, unsettling truth that I had spent years observing, analyzing, thinking, exploring, yet still living inside a limited frame drawn by culture. And if I, someone who spent his life warning humanity about mental traps, could still fall for one, imagine how deeply trapped the average mind is. The real danger is not that we are asleep. The real danger is that we think we are awake. When I speak of awakening, I don't mean some poetic metaphor. I mean an actual reconfiguration of perception, where the illusions collapse and reality reveals itself not as a place, but as a process, a living, breathing intelligence that responds to the quality of our awareness. And I remember the exact moment this became clear to me. I was observing a simple pattern on the ground, the way shadow and light played together, when suddenly the world didn't look like the world anymore. It looked like a code, alive, shifting, communicating, not metaphorically, but literally. And I realized that everything around us is information. Everything is speaking. Everything is responding to consciousness. But how many people ever truly notice? How many people ever slow down enough to observe the world without the filters they inherited from society? How many people dare to question whether their identity is even theirs? We are taught to fear our own minds, to fear imagination, to fear the unknown, to fear questioning the status quo. But what if the unknown is the only real place where truth lives? What if the imagination is not a fantasy, but the doorway to the next stage of human evolution? What if everything we fear is actually everything we need? This was the revelation that haunted me. Humanity is running out of time to discover its own mind. Culture is collapsing into noise. Technology is accelerating faster than our wisdom. Attention spans are shrinking. Curiosity is dying. And people are beginning to prefer confusion over clarity because clarity demands responsibility. We are becoming comfortable inside cages designed to keep us entertained but unconscious. And I've watched it happen. I've watched people trade their potential for distraction, their freedom for certainty, their imagination for safety. They would rather live inside a predictable prison than step into the dangerous beauty of the unknown. But here's the secret. No one wants to admit the unknown is the only place where transformation happens. I once asked myself a question that I believe all of humanity must ask now. If reality is shaped by consciousness, then who is shaping my consciousness? And the moment I asked it, everything changed, because I realized that most of my fears were inherited, most of my beliefs were borrowed, and most of my limitations were designed by a culture that benefits from unconscious minds. And so I began to dismantle myself, not destroy, dismantle. I observed my thoughts, questioned my assumptions, hunted down every mental cage I could find, and every time I broke one open, the world expanded. My sense of self expanded. My understanding of time, of connection, of purpose, all of it transformed. And it all began with that terrifying question: who is controlling the way you think? If you do not shape your own mind, something else will. That is humanity's crisis. Not war, not politics, not climate. The real crisis is the collapse of consciousness, the slow death of the human ability to question reality. And without that ability, we lose everything: creativity, intuition, meaning, evolution. I realize that we stand at a crossroads. One path leads deeper into abstraction, distraction, and unconsciousness. The other leads into a future where humanity finally becomes aware of itself as a creative force, not a victim of circumstance. But to step onto that second path, you have to confront the truths you've been avoiding your entire life. You have to face the internal walls you've mistaken for personality. You have to break the illusions that have kept you small, obedient, predictable. And here's where the real fear comes in. The moment you begin questioning your beliefs, the world around you begins to distort. The people who once understood you no longer do. The systems you trusted begin to crumble. The meaning you built your life on dissolves, and for a brief moment you feel as if you are falling into nothingness. I felt that. I lived that. And it terrified me. But then something miraculous happened. The nothingness wasn't empty. It was full of potential, full of possibility, full of truths I had never been brave enough to see. And I understood that the void we fear is not the end. It is the beginning. This is the warning humanity must hear. If you cling to the illusions of the past, you will never discover the possibilities of the future. We are not meant to be consumers of reality. We are meant to be creators of it. But creation requires consciousness, and consciousness requires courage: the courage to see, the courage to question, the courage to dismantle the self you inherited so you can build the self you were meant to become. I have seen what happens when a human mind begins to awaken from the inside. It is not peaceful. It is not gentle. It is a rupture, violent, beautiful, undeniable. It is the moment when you stop being a character in someone else's story and become the author of your own. And once you taste that freedom, you can never go back. But most people never taste it. Most people never even approach it. Most people remain trapped in the abstract prisons built from fear, language, culture, and belief. And this is why I say humanity is running out of time. Not because the world is ending, but because consciousness is shrinking. Because minds are closing. Because the human spirit is being numbed into silence. And if we do not wake up soon, we may forget that we ever had the power to wake up at all. Because if we do not wake up soon, we may forget that we ever had the power to wake up at all. And that realization stayed with me like a shadow that refused to disappear. I kept feeling as if humanity was standing in a fragile moment of history where every decision, every thought, every belief was shaping the direction of our evolution. Not on a physical level, but on the level of consciousness itself. And I could sense that something was changing. Something subtle yet monumental, as if the structure of reality was beginning to respond differently to human awareness. I remember walking through a crowded city one afternoon, watching people move like currents in a river. Everyone seemed lost inside their own small worlds, screens, routines, worries, ambitions that didn't belong to them. And as I watched them, I suddenly felt like I was looking at a species that had forgotten it was alive. Not just breathing, not just functioning, but alive in the sense of being aware of its own existence. And in that moment, I felt an ache inside me, a deep sorrow, because I could see the potential in every single person passing by, yet none of them were using even a fraction of it. It was like watching a civilization sleepwalk toward its own extinction, not through disaster, but through unconsciousness. The strangest part was that the world itself seemed to sense this. Reality felt heavy, slow, as if waiting for humans to finally notice something crucial. I could feel it in the way time behaved, in the way patterns repeated, in the way synchronicities appeared like warnings written in symbolic code. I started noticing moments that felt too intentional to be random. A book falling off a shelf at the exact moment I was thinking about its topic. A stranger saying a sentence that answered a question I had asked myself silently moments before. The feeling of being guided towards something without knowing what. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But the more I observed, the more obvious it became. Reality was interacting with my awareness. Not metaphorically, but literally, as if consciousness and existence were two ends of the same communication channel, and the message was becoming urgent. It was as though the universe was saying, if you don't evolve your mind now, you will lose the ability to evolve at all. That message terrified me. Not because it meant danger, but because it meant responsibility. I had spent years exploring the edges of perception, but this was different. This felt like a call to action, and I wasn't sure if humanity was ready to answer it. I could feel the gap widening between what we are and what we could become. A gap created by fear, by routine, by the hypnotic pull of modern life. People were sinking deeper into their digital identities, while their inner worlds grew quieter, emptier, more disconnected. And I knew that consciousness cannot evolve in silence. It requires friction, curiosity, questioning, imagination. But those qualities are disappearing. I could sense it every time I spoke to someone who had lost the ability to wonder. Every time I watched a person accept a belief without ever asking why. Every time I saw someone surrender their individuality to the collective noise. It felt like watching a light fade out slowly, one mind at a time. So I turned inward because I needed to understand what was happening. I needed to explore the structure of my own mind again, with the same intensity as my early years. I needed to see whether the problem was out there or inside us. And the deeper I went, the clearer it became. The human mind is not dying because of external forces. It is dying because we no longer know how to use it. We treat the mind as a tool for survival, not a gateway to transformation. We use it to calculate, to predict, to plan, to compare, to worry, to fear, but rarely to explore, rarely to expand, rarely to imagine something beyond the world we've been conditioned to accept. And I realized that imagination is not an escape from reality. It is the raw material from which reality is made. I began to observe my thoughts with a new kind of attentiveness, noticing how they shaped the emotional texture of my experience. A single fearful thought could distort my perception. Single curious thought could open a doorway into insight. And I learned that consciousness behaves like a living organism. It grows when fed, and it starves when ignored. Most people are starving their consciousness without even realizing it. I saw how language acts as both a tool and a trap. We rely on words to understand the world, but words also limit what we can perceive. If you cannot name something, you begin to believe it does not exist. And humanity has stopped inventing new ways of perceiving because we have grown comfortable with the old ones. But comfort is the enemy of evolution. The more I explored, the more I noticed that fear is the architect of almost every limitation. Fear of uncertainty, fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of stepping outside the boundaries of social acceptance. And fear creates predictable minds, minds that behave like programmed machines, repeating the same patterns, the same beliefs, the same emotional cycles. A mind ruled by fear cannot expand, it can only defend itself. And a civilization built on fear cannot evolve, it can only survive.
I realized then that the true evolutionary
Leap is not physical, technological, or intellectual. It is psychological. It is a shift from fear-based consciousness to curiosity-based consciousness. And I could see what humanity could become if this shift occurred. I saw a species capable of perceiving time differently, capable of communicating through intuition, capable of creating realities instead of escaping them. But I also saw how fragile this possibility is. It requires courage. It requires self-awareness. It requires the willingness to break the narratives that have shaped us for generations. Most people are terrified to break their internal narratives. They cling to their identity even when it is hurting them, because the unknown feels like death. But the unknown is where the next version of humanity is waiting. I felt as if reality itself was standing on the edge of a threshold, inviting us to step through, but we were too distracted to even notice the doorway. This is why I kept exploring, kept questioning, kept dismantling my own assumptions, because the more I let go of who I thought I was, the more I understood what humanity could become. But this understanding came with a weight that pressed on my chest like the final breath before revelation. Because I knew something that most people are not ready to accept. The transformation of consciousness is not guaranteed. It is a choice. And a choice must be made before the window closes. There are moments in history where evolution accelerates, where the old world collapses, and the new one emerges from the ashes. But those moments are rare, and they are dangerous. They demand awareness, courage, and willingness to confront the unknown. And I feel deep in my being that humanity is now standing in one of those moments. The question is not whether change is coming. The question is whether we will rise with it or be crushed beneath it. I could feel the urgency in every corner of my mind. It was like a rising tide of insight that wouldn't let me rest. I knew we were approaching something monumental, something that would redefine the meaning of being human. But the direction of that change depended entirely on our awareness. If humanity continues to shrink its consciousness, to numb its imagination, to silence its questioning, then the future will be built by unconscious minds, and unconscious creations are dangerous. But if we awaken, even slightly, even momentarily, we could ignite a transformation that echoes through the entire species. A transformation that begins not with technology, not with politics, but with one simple realization. We are more than we have been taught to believe. And once that realization takes root, nothing can stop what comes next. And once that realization takes root, nothing can stop what comes next. Because awareness, once awakened, spreads like a fire that refuses to die. It moves from one mind to another, igniting something ancient, something buried beneath centuries of conditioning. And as that thought echoed in me, I began to understand that the true revolution humanity is waiting for is not external. It will not come from governments, institutions, or machines. It will emerge from the silent depths of the human mind, from the moment an individual chooses to observe reality without filters, labels, or inherited fears. But the danger is that most people never make that choice. They drift through life as if consciousness is a casual accident, not understanding that it is the most precious and fragile force in the universe. I could feel how close we were to losing it, how dangerously close we were to becoming a species that no longer remembers how to think beyond the boundaries of culture. And it frightened me, because once awareness collapses, once imagination dries up, once curiosity disappears, there is no path back. A civilization can rebuild its cities, its technology, its systems, but not its consciousness. That is something that evolves slowly, painfully, through countless generations. And we are on the verge of discarding it like a forgotten relic. I kept reflecting on this every time I watched the world move faster and minds grow smaller. People chasing stimulation instead of meaning, people mistaking information for understanding, people valuing convenience over depth. It was as if humanity had created a world where distraction was the default state of existence, and reflection was becoming an endangered experience. The mind cannot expand in a world that never pauses, never breathes, never allows silence long enough for insight to arise. And I realized something unsettling. The future will not be shaped by the most intelligent people, but by the ones who can still feel, the ones who can still observe, the ones who can still question. Intelligence without consciousness becomes machinery. Knowledge without awareness becomes manipulation. Progress without reflection becomes destruction. And if humanity continues down its current path, we may become technologically advanced but spiritually extinct. But I refuse to accept that as the final ending. I refuse to believe that the human story was meant to fade into noise, because I had seen glimpses of what we could become. I had felt it in states of heightened awareness, in moments where the boundaries of perception dissolved and the mind opened like a vast landscape. In those moments, I could sense a version of humanity that was infinitely more insightful, compassionate, and imaginative than the one we see today. A humanity that understood that consciousness is not a byproduct of biology, but a fundamental property of the universe expressing itself through us. Every time I experienced that expanded state, it felt like the universe was whispering a secret that humanity has forgotten. You are not observers of reality. You are participants in its creation. And the quality of your consciousness shapes the quality of your world. This insight began to change the way I interacted with everything, the way I looked at people, the way I listened, the way I thought. I started to see layers beneath layers, meanings beneath meanings. Every conversation became an exchange of reality-creating energy. Every emotion became a signal pointing toward hidden patterns. Every moment felt like a fragment of a larger cosmic story unfolding through human experience. And I understood that if more people could reach even a fraction of this awareness, everything would change. But awareness is not handed to you. It must be chosen. It must be cultivated. It must be protected from the forces that try to shrink it. And those forces are everywhere. They exist in culture, in media, in routine, in the relentless pressure to conform. They shape the way we think, the way we speak, the way we interpret the world. They make sure that most people never question the narrative, because questioning the narrative threatens the stability of the system. The system fears awakened minds, because awakened minds cannot be controlled. They cannot be manipulated. They cannot be chained by fear, seduced by distraction, or silenced by authority. An awakened mind is dangerous not because it rebels, but because it sees. And once you see, you cannot unsee. This is why I have always believed that the most radical act a human can commit is to examine their own consciousness, not with the intention of escaping reality, but with the intention of transforming it. Because transformation begins within. It begins in the quiet moments when you dismantle the stories you've inherited. It begins when you stop mistaking your thoughts for truth. It begins when you ask yourself not who you are, but who you could be if you stopped living inside the lines someone else drew. I felt this transformation happening inside me like a slow-burning wildfire. It wasn't pleasant. It wasn't peaceful. It demanded that I confront every belief I had ever held. It forced me to face the parts of myself I had ignored. It pushed me into the unknown again and again, until I realized that the unknown was the only place where evolution truly happens. Growth does not come from certainty. It comes from the courage to move toward what you do not understand. And that is exactly what humanity has forgotten, the courage to explore its own consciousness. We explore space, but not the mind. We create machines, but not meaning. We chase progress, but not purpose. And the more we ignore the inner world, the more chaotic the outer world becomes. The imbalance is growing, and I can feel that reality itself is beginning to react, not out of malice, but out of necessity. Because consciousness and reality are intertwined, and when one becomes distorted, the other must adjust. I began to sense this adjustment in strange ways, moments of déjà vu that felt too precise, time stretching and compressing in ways that logic couldn't explain, dreams that felt like transmissions, thoughts that arrived from nowhere but carried truths I could not deny. It was as if the universe was signaling that the window for transformation was narrowing, and if humanity did not step through soon, it would close. And that is what keeps me awake. Not fear, but urgency. A deep, overwhelming awareness that we are standing at the edge of an evolutionary threshold. And most people are too distracted to notice the doorway in front of them. This threshold is not external, it is internal. It is a shift in perception, a reawakening of imagination, a remembering of our role as co-creators of reality. It is the moment when we stop living like passengers and start living like participants. I know what humanity is capable of. I have seen the brilliance that emerges when a mind breaks free from the chains of conditioning. I have felt the infinite potential that unfolds when you stop living in fear. I have watched people transform their entire lives simply by changing the way they perceive themselves. And every time I witness this, I know that the future is not doomed. It is waiting for awareness, waiting for courage, waiting for humanity to remember itself. Because once that remembering begins, even faintly, even quietly, everything will start to shift, and the world will have no choice but to follow. Because once that remembering begins, even faintly, even quietly, everything will start to shift, and the world will have no choice but to follow. That thought stayed in my mind like a distant echo, repeating itself through the corridors of my awareness. I could feel that something vast was approaching, not in the form of an external event, but as an internal wave, a psychological shift so subtle, yet so profound, that most people would only recognize it after it had already transformed them. And I knew this wave wasn't coming from outside humanity. It was rising from within us. I kept sensing it in my interactions with people, even those who weren't consciously on any path of awakening. Something in their eyes, something in the way they paused for a moment longer than usual, something in the sudden questions they asked themselves when they thought no one was listening, as if their inner world was knocking from beneath the surface, asking to be seen again. Humans are experts at hiding from themselves, but something bigger than our defenses is beginning to push through. It felt like consciousness itself was tired of being ignored. Everywhere I looked, I could feel this simmering pressure building. An evolutionary demand for awareness, almost like a call that human beings could no longer pretend not to hear. And yet the tragedy is that most people dismiss these inner signals as anxiety, confusion, or emotional turbulence, never realizing that what they are experiencing is the early tremor before the mind expands. We mistake awakening for discomfort, because awakening threatens the identity we are attached to, and I understood why people resist it. Awakening is not gentle. It dismantles you. It strips you of the false layers you've built around your soul. It takes away the narratives you cling to, the illusions that comfort you, the conditioning that structures your perception. Awakening is not the light entering. It is the walls collapsing. And humans love their walls even when they imprison them. But the prison cracks eventually. And for the first time in a long time, I could sense those cracks everywhere. In culture, in relationships, in art, in silence, in the collective unease that people can't explain, in the loneliness that technology amplifies, in the growing sense that something is missing, even though the world offers more stimulation than ever. These are not accidents. These are symptoms of a consciousness trying to grow inside a reality too small to contain it. And the more I paid attention, the clearer it became. Consciousness evolves through confrontation, not comfort. Every crisis humanity faces is not a punishment, but an invitation. Whether it is ecological collapse, technological acceleration, political fragmentation, or psychological burnout, each is a mirror forcing us to face the consequences of unconscious living. But instead of looking at the mirror, humanity tries to fix the reflection. That is why we continue repeating the same patterns. We treat the symptoms, never the source. The source is always consciousness. It became obvious to me that humanity is not suffering from a lack of resources, intelligence, or technology. Humanity is suffering from a lack of awareness. A species that cannot understand itself cannot understand the world it creates. Everything outside us is an extension of what is inside us. And until we evolve inwardly, outward change will always be temporary, unstable, and incomplete. This realization shaped the way I saw the future, not as a straight line, but as a branching path defined by our collective awakening. And the strange thing is, the universe seems to be waiting for our decision. Reality feels like a system that adapts based on the level of consciousness interacting with it. The more unconscious we are, the more chaotic it becomes. The more aware we are, the more coherent it feels. I noticed this pattern everywhere. The moment I expanded my perception, the external world responded, aligning itself in ways that felt impossible to explain logically. Synchronicities increased, meaning intensified. Time became fluid, as if the universe was saying, this is what was always available, you were just too asleep to see it. I realized then that reality is not fixed, it is participatory, and if that is true, then humanity is not simply moving through time, we are shaping it. But shaping requires awareness, and awareness requires courage. And courage requires the willingness to abandon the stories that keep us small. This is where the true danger lies. Humanity is becoming more powerful than ever, but not more conscious. We're gaining tools without understanding the hands that hold them. We are accelerating without knowing where we are going. We are expanding outward while shrinking inward. And that imbalance cannot sustain itself. A species that grows technologically but not psychologically is like a child with the power of a god. It becomes a danger to itself. As these thoughts deepened, I began to understand why the ancients placed such emphasis on inner wisdom. They knew something we have forgotten, that a mind without self-awareness becomes destructive, while a mind with awareness becomes transformative. Not because awareness makes everything easy, but because awareness reveals the sacredness of existence. It dissolves the illusion of separation. It awakens responsibility. It connects the individual to the whole. And once that connection is felt, even for a moment, destruction becomes impossible. Creativity becomes inevitable. This is the threshold humanity is approaching. A threshold where we must finally decide whether we will continue living as unconscious fragments or awaken as a unified, evolving species. And the choice cannot be made collectively unless it is first made individually. Every person who awakens becomes a node of clarity in the network of human consciousness. Every mind that expands sends ripples outward, influencing others in ways unseen. The transformation of a species begins with the transformation of one mind. And so I turned inward once again, asking myself what awakening truly requires. Not the poetic version, not the mystical narrative, the real, raw process. And the answer came quietly, without drama. Awakening requires honesty, brutal honesty, the kind that strips you bare, the kind that exposes the illusions you cling to, the kind that forces you to confront the parts of yourself you pretend do not exist. Until you do that, no amount of knowledge or spirituality will change you. You will simply decorate your prison instead of escaping it. And I understood that this is why most people avoid awakening, because it demands the one thing humans fear more than pain, the truth, but the truth is the gateway to freedom. And freedom is the precursor to evolution. I kept exploring these insights, following them further into the depths of my awareness until I began to sense the outline of something enormous, something like a cosmic intelligence woven into the fabric of reality. Not a being, not a deity, but a field of potential, an ocean of mind that our consciousness emerges from. And it felt as if this intelligence was watching us, not with judgment, but with longing, as if it wanted us to evolve, as if it was waiting for us to open our eyes and realize that we are expressions of it. The idea that we are alone in the universe seems laughable once you understand the nature of consciousness. Life is not an accident. Awareness is not a mistake. We are not separate from the cosmos. We are the cosmos becoming aware of itself. And the next stage of evolution is the moment we accept this truth, not philosophically, not intellectually, but experientially. When I touched that realization, even briefly, everything changed. The fear that once controlled me dissolved. The uncertainty that once confused me became a doorway. The unknown stopped being a threat and became a landscape of infinite possibility. And I understood that the universe is not asking us to be perfect. It is asking us to be aware, because awareness is the seed from which all transformation grows. And now, as I look at humanity standing at this crossroads, I can feel that the window is still open. The possibility still exists. The potential is still alive. But windows do not remain open forever. Opportunities do not wait indefinitely. Evolution is patient, but not eternal. And if we choose unconsciousness, if we choose distraction, if we choose fear, then the path ahead will lead us into a future where the human spirit slowly withers until it becomes unrecognizable. But if we choose awareness, even imperfectly, even trembling, even slowly, the future will unfold in a way that elevates us beyond anything we have ever imagined. And that brings me to the final truth that echoes through every corner of my being. The future of humanity is not written. It is waiting for us to write it. Not through technology, not through power, but through consciousness, through the courage to awaken, through the willingness to see, through the choice to expand beyond the boundaries of our conditioning. Humanity's next chapter will not be determined by the world we inherit, but by the awareness we cultivate within ourselves. And the moment we realize this, truly realize it, the world will begin to transform in ways that defy logic, history, and expectation. Because when a species remembers its own mind, its evolution becomes unstoppable.